So Charlie, you wrote an article that I absolutely loved recently that was entitled "My Beef with XR," and so we are, we have this terminology soup happening. I loved your arguments against the use of XR, but maybe just to kick things off, if you can explain kind of what's happening with XR right now, how AR is related to that, and
sure.
Tell them about the article you wrote.
Sure. Well, it's actually not the first article I've written about this. I mean, we have a lot of confusion around language, particularly outside of our community. So the abuse of language started with Microsoft appropriating what was called the Milgram scale, which is a flawed concept from 1994, which suggested that there was a spectrum of immersion with augmented reality, or actual reality on your left, and then augmented reality leading to full occlusion on the right, full occlusion versus physical reality. And I had an objection to the Milgram scale even before Microsoft stole it and turned it into the Microsoft mixed reality spectrum, on which one end was conveniently the HoloLens, and on the other end was their fully occluded headset, which they called Windows MR. So raise your hand if you were not confused. They may have the last laugh. Ultimately, we will have interoperable AR, VR devices as one of many options. So they may have the last laugh, but that laugh is going to be in like 2025. So in the meantime, so they took MR, right? So that was my first objection, because MR had other meanings, right? I mean, it referred to, and it refers to the physical and the virtual affecting one another inside of AR. That is the distinction. So that if you have a virtual ball here and you're looking at it with mobile augmented reality and you hit it with your real hand and it bounces off the wall as if the wall were real, that's mixed reality. If you're walking around inside of the void or any kind of free roam VR and they give you a prop, a stick, and it's a texture mapped and appears to be a torch, or there's wind or smell, that's mixed reality. So Microsoft completely changed the meaning of that and confused everything. Then Qualcomm introduced XR and said XR is, since MR really, nobody wants to do Microsoft's way, we're going to do our way, which is XR. And to which I wrote an article that said, wait a minute, XR means bio-augmentation. And it's meant that for 30 years. They applied for a trademark application. Myself and several other academics objected and stopped them. So they reapplied using a graphic mark, which, if it has a graphic or a typographical treatment, you can trademark that, but you can't trademark a word that's already in common use. So it's very easy to take down a trademark application. Qualcomm is awfully nice to me, so obviously they don't read very well, which is fine, because I'll take free stuff all day long. I mean,
yeah, I get it.
Oh, if you put that up online, I guess I'm in trouble, but. And anyway, so unfortunately, XR has been widely adopted because it does solve a problem, because people don't like using two different words. But just to go back to the Milgram scale, the reason that I think it's flawed and the differences between VR and AR have nothing to do with immersion is that VR and AR come from different places and they do different things, right? VR and is related to man's quest for immersion. It's, campfire stories and cave paintings and Baroque churches and the wheel and the steam engine. These are all tools like the club that make men better. They make us stronger. We can be faster. We can be smarter. I'm sorry, I'm conflating the two myself. So virtual reality is related to our suspension of disbelief, even in training scenarios and business applications, which so far, it's great for simulation, and if anything, that's its current killer app. AR is very different than VR. It is a tool like a club, that augments the world around us. If you fully occlude it, it's not AR anymore, right? You can't occlude the world so much that it's now redefined as VR. So that's my other objection to MR, is that it conflates AR and VR. So anyway, at Augmented World Expo, my friend and Tom's business partner, Ori Imbar, gets on stage, and he always does a very showman-like launch to the show, and it wasn't a disappointment. He had a real-time point cloud projection of himself from backstage, so we saw the dimensional Ori before the real Ori walked on stage, and then he was his own heckler through the rest of his presentation. And he was wearing this t-shirt, I love XR. And the theme of the presentation was go XR or go home. And so I sat there and I thought, fuck, I've lost. It's over. And you know, we have a lot of things to talk about. You know, so I'm going to stop talking about XR. I've lost. I'm completely right, but I've lost. I suppose I will use that word on occasion, or accept in conversation that someone else is using it and not stop them. Right. But you know, once Ori Imbar, who is probably the premier or one of the premier thought leaders in the space, declares a truce, then you don't keep fighting the war.
Right. How many of you are working right now in augmented reality? Oh, great. What happened? How many in the total crowd are using XR as part of your vernacular? Interesting.
See, I should have won.
You've won this crowd. So thanks for talking about XR. I don't want to talk too much about language, but it is an important conversation to be had because I am noticing confusion in the industry, even around what XR means. But that's a whole other panel. Let's start talking about AR, augmented reality.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we could start with this very poetic terminology that you used about painting the world with data. And it's such a critical and fundamental ingredient to the augmented world. So what do you mean by the world will be painted by data, and what does it mean for augmented reality?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're going to build let me do it this way. Every person, every place, and everything is going to have an invisible dimension to it. So if you point your camera at a car, you can access information about the car. Using facial recognition, you can know about people, and that has very disturbing privacy implications, so that we may or may not ultimately be able to do that because of that, right? Because we're now entering a world where we won't do certain things because of privacy, and I think that's probably a big one. But certainly books. I wrote my book as an augmented reality book, and it's built for mobile augmented reality. So mobile augmented reality is exploding, and phones are now capable of accessing in real time geolocated data. So everybody here, very shortly, although certain apps do it, will be able to place content in places typically for people in your social network to find. Right? This will be something Snapchat does, Google is doing it, Apple is doing it. They're time-stamped. They go away in 24 or 48 hours. The storage implications of the AR cloud are staggering. I mean, somebody said to me, well, how do I cash in on the AR cloud? I want to get in early. I said, invest in Amazon Web Services. You can't invest in Unity, invest in Amazon Web Services, because they're about to get about 10 times bigger. So, you're going to point your camera at a building, and the building is going to tell you about itself. Everything is going to have a story that you can access on demand. Now, you probably won't want to do that because it has to be contextual and timely. So that's another aspect of the world being painted with data. In whatever this visual browser is, it has to have some AI, and it has to have some filters, because it can't show you everything. There'll be graffiti, there'll be pornography, there'll be advertising. So you want to be able to turn that off, or you would never use an augmented reality headset, let alone hold your phone up like this to get information. I mean, except for entertainment purposes, right? The same way I use Blipper. Blipper doesn't really do anything. It identifies things I already know the names of, but it is really good for blowing people's minds about computer vision, and computer vision is the universal visual browser. And it needs to get standardized. So lots of things need to happen before the world is painted with data, but it will be, and soon, and it will be done for mobile phones, and the painters will primarily be you, right? It's primarily going to get painted with pictures of food and pets, on social media, and that's where the AR cloud has the potential to be really, really huge, of course, in enterprise, but it'll start to touch everything, right? Remember when people didn't have websites, and now not only companies, but people and kids have websites. So the same thing is about to happen to the physical world.
And where are we with the AR cloud today, and who's involved in forming it? Will it end up just being big players?
Well, let me say, in the near term, there will be lots of AR clouds, right? So Snapchat has its own cloud. Google has its own cloud. So there'll be these silos, right? But at some point, there'll be software that cuts across all the silos so that in your camera, you will have LinkedIn, you will have Facebook, you will have Twitter, and you'll just select. It's the only UI that makes any sense. Now, the other thing, of course, is we have to know what's painted with data, right? So you have your phone or your AR glasses, you don't know where the data is. It's invisible. So there needs to be some kind of UI or GUI invented that starts to teach us how to see anew.
And that's kind of maybe what Snap's doing with their Snap code.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Just
exactly.
letting people know that there's something there to visualize. So it kind of like when you were speaking about where the AR cloud today is, it reminded me of like the bulletin boards. Of
Yeah,
like the
that's exactly
era.
what it is.
So do you see, like, is it going to be Google that's going to unite that?
Well,
and create-
Tim Merrill says that it's Apple. Tim Merrill is walking around saying, you guys know who Tim is? He's an industry analyst and venture capitalist with a firm called DigiCapital, and he writes about the space and economics and projections quite a bit. His thesis is that Apple has already won. It's just right now we're all just fighting about nothing because Apple is going to own the entire AR cloud. So it'll devolve very quickly into a duopoly, the way Android and iOS split up mobile phones, so it shall be with the AR cloud. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure there won't be a new Google that comes out of this. The Google for the visual world certainly could generate that scale of wealth. I mean, we are in the middle, or I should say at the very beginning, of the greatest wealth creation opportunity since the internet. People say, well, where are we? When's it going to happen? I'm like, this is PCs in 1992. Right? There's bulletin boards for real geeks who can stand a 2400 baud modem, but there's not really an AOL.
Yeah. Well, and anybody from Uber to Amazon are also well equipped in this area. Anybody that's already been mapping the world or gathering data. Instagram, Facebook and Instagram.
Well, the best AR app out there hasn't been publicly released yet, but it's the enhancement to Google Maps that gives you walking directions with actual graphics, right? Because when you get out of the subway and it says, head southeast on 7th Avenue, well, I mean, even if you're a New Yorker, you get turned around and you don't know where you are. So it has little strobing lines that show you where to walk, and they've even got a little fox you can chase. I think it's an option, in the same way that you could use a satellite view.
Well, let's talk about consumer use cases.
Mm-hmm.
Is mobile AR worth our time? A lot of people say that it is a stopgap towards head-borne devices, but
well, I wouldn't call it a stopgap. I would call it, that's the path to invisible computing. And we're kidding ourselves if we're saying, oh, well, head-mounted displays are the end. Head-mounted displays are the ultimate. No, the ultimate is invisible contextual computing, where we are as close to being bio-augmented as we possibly could be. So we're talking about earbuds, we're talking about contact lenses. This is the future. Now, the future will not be evenly distributed. So this kind of technology is not going to be for, like, mobile phones, everybody, for a very long time. And I'm talking now like 50, 75 year, real futurist stuff.
Right.
But that's where we go beyond the head-mounted display. And again, we still don't know much about what the head-mounted display is going to be, because it's really just raining interim devices, right? If you go buy a head-mounted display for augmented reality today, it'll be like buying one of the first MP3 players. When the iPod comes out, you're going to have to throw it in the garbage. Yeah. So that's what I mean by an interim device.
But what are some of the consumer applications that are getting you excited today?
Well, needless to say, mapping, as you mentioned, is very significant. It obviously has implications for self-driving cars. facial identification, my favorite consumer case, which has just so disturbing in its privacy implications, is also a killer app, right? Because I go to a lot of conferences. Probably many of you out there are in my social graph, either on Twitter or LinkedIn, and it would be great, and I don't know your name. And it would be great if maybe a little light strobed next to you and Alexa whispered your ear to me. I'm really now, I don't want my whole field of view occluded, right? I don't want to see your LinkedIn profile and half of my view. But of course, you would have to choose to be seen, right? And that's the main thing. Facial recognition is a killer app under the right circumstances.
How many of you would be okay with a facial recognition app? Okay, about half.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time to socialize that idea, but to me, that's a killer app example, just because it solves a pain point.
It's memory augmentation.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the other thing we don't really know is what's the interface, right? Everybody's using different interfaces: hand, gesture, voice, ring controller, air mouse. So it's unclear how that's going to.
It sounds like this is like the wild, wild west.
I mean, it's computers in 1992.
Okay. And is it the same in the enterprise, or is the enterprise a little bit further along?
Well, the enterprise is further along because for consumers, you need to make a Swiss Army knife, right? It needs to be, your iPhone does everything. It's a map, it's a compass, it's a phone, it's a messaging machine. You don't need to do any of that in business. You are making a dagger. It is built to do one thing. It's a club. It's meant to, beat on wiring diagrams. The other thing about business as opposed to consumers is that it can be spectacularly unsexy, and it is. And there is nothing stupider or more annoying than a monocular micro display hanging around on your face all day long. But if you work in a warehouse, if your job previously, involved complex handwork and assembly where you were shifting your attention from a laptop to the handwork, which is really a feat of memory, now the microdisplay eliminates all that. People resist it at first because it is annoying as hell. But then people are like, I would never do this job without it. Right. And Boeing is saving $10 million on wiring a jet now. And they make a lot of jets, so their annual savings off of an investment in, I don't know, $5 or $10 million is now going to return, because, right, in business, there's only two ways to make money, right? Charge higher prices or cut your costs. So everybody is rushing to AR and the big consulting firms, and they're saying, please help me do what Boeing just did. And, if you analyze their process, anybody who has a warehouse, right? Anybody who has a factory has a warehouse. Anybody who's ever worked in a warehouse has worked with an RF gun. So you have the RF gun on your belt, you find the item, you shoot it, you have to remember what it says, you put it away, you pick up the item in the box and you take it to the factory. And if you don't have the RF gun, if you just go like this, you do your job like 50 times faster. And, people want to be good at their jobs. People embrace tools that make them good at their jobs very quickly, and AR is just exploding in enterprise for that reason, and not just with monocular microdisplays. People use tablets. So, I think that the idea that we've got these fantastic contextually aware, goggles coming from Magic Leap or anybody else is a fantasy right now. But we have these fantastic practical applications in enterprise. And in consumer, it's coming. We'll see it seep into the apps we use every day, like Google Maps.
Yeah. I always say, technology has followed a very clear path, right? Like, you have academia to military, military to enterprise, enterprise to consumer. So it makes a lot more sense that we'd be seeing smart glasses first at work. And if you think about, what happened at work, if you really break down what computers did to filing, or just writing reports.
Exactly.
Those are really unsexy use cases, but the savings of time, we forget. These new tools have kind of wiped our memory of how long it took us to do our
Both
job.
VR and AR are following the exact development path of the personal computer, right down to how many years it is taking. Right? We always overestimate the short term, right? So it's 2014, we're looking at the Oculus Rift, and we're saying, well, by 2020, we're going to be rocking in VR. And we forget the Oculus Go was the equivalent, or the Oculus Rift was the equivalent of one of the first Macs. So really in 2014 we were 10 to 15 years away. Yeah. And the way that people became familiar with the PC is the way they'll become familiar with certainly head-mounted displays for virtual reality and ultimately head-mounted displays for augmented reality, they will be in the workplace first.
Let's take one or two questions from the crowd. I'm just, well, actually, you have a big, loud voice, Alex. I know you do, you can do it.
So when we're talking about paying more data and people going out there and placing AR markers and stuff like that, who controls the space? Should the owner of the property be allowed to control whether somebody can go in and paint their space? Because I wouldn't let somebody come into my real house.
Yes, of course not.
But the other flip side to that is, how do you stop somebody from not allowing somebody to identify that property's negative aspects? So it's somewhere, I don't know, what, you know, white supremacist meeting hall, maybe it would be
Right.
nice to let, you know,
Right.
the AR crowd let you know that.
Right.
Well, I mean, again, there are services that are saying, you know, pay us money so someone won't take a shit on your house in augmented reality. The reality of augmented reality is that it's going to be closely associated with the apps you use every day. So unless it's your Facebook friend, you're never going to see that content. Right? There may be some public channels that have graffiti and pornography that people will access, and no one can control, you know, what gets put up on Reddit, for example. But you would never see that unless Reddit was one of your apps and you wanted to see what strangers thought. Most people don't. Most people want to get choices like they get in Google because they don't know. Are you looking at that building because there's a restaurant on the bottom floor, or you want to know about it, you know, whose offices are there? And more precisely, rather than whose offices are there, it's who in your social graph has an office there. So that's a lot of different layers of information, but you would choose, oh, I want LinkedIn, I want Facebook. You know, you're not going to get in the AR cloud random information from bad actors unless it's hacking.
But you make in the online world, it is the way, but we're taking the online world and bringing it into the real world. And the real world has a set of rules and regulations, often government regulated. And how do you mesh the online world that does not have that regulation
Right.
with the real world that has that regulation?
I think we'll see that expression very strongly in interior spaces. People who own buildings, people who have private residences, that information needs to be permanently private, or if it is made public, it needs to be controlled by the property owner. Outside the building, on the street, it's the opposite, right? It's all public. People walk past it every day. What a building looks like, where it is placed, is, you know, shared public knowledge. So that, I think that'll be differentiated by apps. But I don't think you'll ever see a case where, you know, somebody's building is defaced and it ruins everybody else's view of that. I don't see how that is technically possible or why anybody would tolerate a system that allowed it.
Although in the States, there has already been a case where, you know, there was a Pokemon Go game that tried to have some of their game elements in a park, and the city actually deemed that.
Right, you would have to use,
do that.
right, in the States you would have to use legislation to prevent that.
So
and
it is an interesting.
I think we'll see its expression immediately, more or less, in private spaces. People who own hotels and resorts and casinos are not going to want, are going to want to try and control the design. Yeah.
My afraid is that you get some politician who has a rudimentary understanding of the technology, but a political agenda who says, well, I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to ram through legislation. And they're going to kill.
We most likely will probably see. Let's take one more final question from Olga.
Hi, I'm a practical user of VR.
Yeah.
Two years ago. And my question is about optics. I remember seeing one of your tweets that magically doesn't allow the glasses inside the headset. And my question is, like, for example, Murish PC Vive doesn't have a parameter which is good enough for my distance between my eyes, right? And here it is. How do I buy optics? I was waiting for it for magic. Why do I need it? I have complicated glasses.
Well, there are augmented reality glasses coming to the market that account for that. In VR, I think it's a design issue, and ultimately people are going to have to find headsets that accommodate eyewear, or the larger makers are going to have to figure out how to allow us to put prescriptions in there. But in augmented reality, Vuzix, which is introducing the Vuzix Blade later this year, which are essentially virtual reality glasses, much wider field of view, as does the ODG R8. So these will be increasingly available to consumers, and both of them provide for putting prescriptions in them. So people are aware of the half of the people in the world wear eyeglasses. So this is a real giant issue, and the fact that it's been ignored by HTC and Oculus it has been frustrating to me as a wearer of glasses as well. So I agree with that.
But the light field technology will also help with that. And I know that when I tried Avegant's technology, for example, it was like one of the first devices where I didn't need to wear glasses. That was what was magical about it. And so I think we're going to start to see those types of technologies come out, because light field is much more akin to how we actually see.
How do you not see that if a prescription is complicated, it has plasma
That's true.
and astigmatism and all this stuff, and lots
That's
of
true.
people have it.
But I really recommend that you stay for the conversation with Yvonne Felix, who has low vision, and she's going to be telling you a story about the impact of eSight, the video glasses, on her actual vision, and its ability to help her regenerate muscle within the eye. So I think that we're actually just at the tipping point of understanding how these technologies are going to help our eyes and or help our eyes evolve, right? Which is why there's a lot of talk around the use of children under 8 being able or not able to use VR devices, because their eyes are at a very gooey state of development. If you were to have a child that just completely lived more in VR, what would their eyesight look like? Would they actually have the same eyesight? That's kind of interesting. Listen, we're going to keep our agenda going. I want to say thank you to Charlie
Thank you.
Fink. Thank you so much. He's going to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm giving a talk tomorrow morning, much longer than this, 45 minutes, but it'll be a lot of Q&A, and it'll be the overall state of AR and VR as I talk about in my book. Speaking of my book, I'm going to be doing a signing right now, and we'll have discounted books for you there. My next book is called The World Will Be Painted with Data. I've been saying that, and I've been sort of working on becoming the poet of augmented and virtual reality. And Tom encouraged me to go after that phrase and ultimately after that book. So I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks, Charlie.
And we'll see you around. Happy to chat in the hall.